In today's video, we talk about the basics of prepping and how to get started. So stay tuned and you'll catch some of my tips on how to get yourself going to become more prepared. Hi folks, welcome to Set Apart Homestead. This is Travis at the Prepared Homestead. And so today's video, I want to talk to you about just the basics of prepping, how to get started. There's a lot of people out there that are becoming more and more interested in how to make themselves more prepared for what's going on in their life and what may happen in their life. And so that's where today's video will take us. Now this is kind of a part 2 video or a second video for one that I posted on my Patreon page a few days ago. So if you're interested in seeing kind of that prequel type video to this, you can go over there and check it out, and I'll have links in the description below if you're interested, and if not, this is certainly a standalone video on its own. So let's get started. How to start prepping. That's a big topic for a lot of people. It can become very overwhelming. There's so much out there, so much information, so much equipment, so many videos now, so many people talking about getting prepared for what's happening. And so it's a little overwhelming at times. I understand for those of you that are very new to this. So I've come up with some list of things to kind of get you going. Now this is not a comprehensive do everything list. This is just really the basics to get you going. And remember that the items that I'm listing, or the things that I'm listing here, you're not going to necessarily do them one at a time. You can do several of these things at once to kind of get you going. So the first thing that we want to talk about is your mindset. Now I've made several videos on this in the past, and if you go through the playlist, you can find them. But your mindset is very critical. You need to realize at first why you even need to be prepared. You need to come to that realization, and I would assume that you're there if you're watching this video, that hey, I've awoken to what's going on around me, and I need to be a little bit more prepared in my life for what's possibly happening or what could happen. And you also have to realize that you are not the same person that once lived 200 or 300 years ago. People that lived in more past times, they just had a natural ability to survive because that's how they lived. They didn't have to worry about what to do if the power went out. They knew how to live. They knew how to go out and hunt food and grow food and forage food. They knew basic survival skills because that was just part of their daily life. We live in a very soft society now where things are very convenient and comfortable. And so we have to learn these things and develop these skills and this mindset because it's just not in the average person's daily life. And so that's part of building that mindset. But also know that the human mind and the human body is far more capable of doing the things than a lot of times we give it credit for. We think that we can't do that. We think we can't survive without heat. We think we can't survive without fresh running water or food that's comes in a box that we can just put in a microwave. We think we can't do that, and yet you can. You can overcome great obstacles if you just have the mindset. To start off with, you need to kind of have a plan, develop a plan, and this is something you're going to be developing through your entire journey of prepping. You're always going to be working and developing this plan, and at first this plan can just be in your mind of the things that you kind of need to get started on, where you're at and where you want to be. Start planning for things that can happen and that will happen. So in other words, don't start off thinking about, okay, how do I plan for World War III, some kind of nuclear attack? Don't worry about that kind of thing. Start planning for things like weather-related emergencies and just daily life disasters that we all face. Are you prepared for what would happen if your car breaks down? Or if there's an ice storm or a tornado or a hurricane, or if you lose your job for a while and it's difficult to purchase food and basic supplies that you need. Are you prepared for these things? Make sure that your plan fits your location and your life. In other words, if you're not in shape, don't have a 60-pound bug-out bag that you're not even capable of carrying for less than a mile. Make sure your equipment, if you live in the woods, make sure your gear and your equipment and the things you have, reflect that. So in other words, if you live in the desert, you probably don't need to be storing heavy winter gear. I know that this seems kind of common sense, but I think a lot of people get so caught up on what they read and things that, I need to have this stuff, and then they don't stop to think that, is that really pertain to my situation? Is that really something that I need to have? And so, that all goes in your plan. Start developing your skills. Skills are very critical. They kind of go hand in hand with, your mindset. You have the mindset to do things, and then you have to have the skills to actually know how to do them. Start with the basics. Don't get too overwhelmed in this. Things like first aid, basic foraging, fire starting, basics of growing food, food storage, food preparation. These are real basic skills that you can start learning right now. Learning from reading the book and learning from actually going out and practicing these skills. Don't worry about being a Navy SEAL. Okay? A lot of people get caught up in that they think they have to be some combat-ready operator. If you want to do that later on in your preparedness journey, that's your choice. But don't worry about that now. Right now, just worry about, learning how to take care of your basic needs. What are your basic daily needs that need to be taken care of for you to survive? And you need to figure out ways that you can prepare to take care of those and the skills that you might need to help you take care of those basic needs. And that's a good place to start. Then, after you do those things, the mindset and the skills, begin with basic supplies. Don't get overwhelmed with this because it can be extremely overwhelming of what you need to store up and the things that you need to get. Like I said, there's all kinds of things out on the market and people trying to sell you the next latest, greatest thing. And sometimes there are some really good things out there, but don't get overwhelmed. Start off with things like food, water, shelter, basic medical care needs. Those are some of your very basic needs that you need to start off with. Things like water. You need 1 gallon per person per day, and that's really the basic minimum. That's not talking about hygiene water. That's not even talking about a lot of cooking. That's just what you need to survive, to stay alive with your food and your water is 1 gallon per person per day. Now, here's the thing. You can't store all the water you need. I would think a first good goal is to store about a week's worth of water for everyone in your home. And then after that, you need to also come up with ways to get water because, if you're planning for 6 months, you can't store up probably 6 months worth of water. At least the average person could not. So you need to have ways to filter water. You need to have ways to gather the water, figure out locations that you can gather the water. Maybe you live near a lake or a river. And so that's a source of water that you can have, or if you have a pond on your land, that would be a good source of water. But then you have to be able to gather that water, and then you have to make that water drinkable. And there's all kinds of filtration systems out there and ways to treat it. Now, always remember that in a down situation, you might have to treat water that's much more contaminated than it would be right now. So even though that water in your nearest lake is certainly not something you want to drink right now, if sewage systems start backing up or industrial waste systems start breaking down, there's going to be the potential for a lot more contaminants in that water. So a simple filtration system may not be good enough. So you might want to filter the water, and then you might want to boil the water, and then you might want to treat the water with something. So have a redundancy system set up because when that water starts becoming extremely contaminated, it becomes much more difficult for a filtration system to get out all of its contaminants. There was a report I read just recently in San Francisco where I'm sure many of you have heard that people are, especially the homeless population as it's exploding, are using the bathroom facilities outdoors so much that there's so much runoff of that fecal matter into the water system that their water systems in San Francisco are having a difficult time cleaning the water enough to make it drinkable. Because there's so much of it. And of course, that's a subject for a different video. But it is a good example that with the more pollutants in the water, it becomes more difficult for just a simple filtration or purification system to handle. So have a redundancy set up for water, because water is life. Next up is food. A good, kind of a general rule of thumb is around 2,400 calories per day. You can go a little higher if you want, because certainly if you're very active, you're going to need more than 2,400 calories a day. But that's a good place to start, is 2,400 calories per day per person. Begin with cheap food. Don't focus so much at first on the real high dollar, prepping supply type foods. Start off with things like dried rice, your dry bulk foods, rice, beans, dried corn, dried wheat. Those things are still really cheap, and you can store up a lot of them pretty quickly. And then try to do this where when you go to the grocery store, you try to pick up at least one small item. A little bag of rice, a little bag of beans. Each time you go to the grocery store is actually a real good way to build up that supply pretty fast. You would be surprised how fast it would take to build up a good supply of every time you run to the store, maybe to pick up a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread, you pick up a little bag of rice with it. And items like that are very cheap. Also, you need to develop, an actual budget. Figure out your budget for all the things that you're going to be, purchasing. And if it's $100 or even $20, stick to that budget and try to increase it along the way. And remember that it's probably a higher priority to buy this type of stuff and have at least some food and certain items that you need than maybe it is to buy that extra soda or extra fancy coffee every, few days. So start developing a working pantry. A lot of people call it a working prepper pantry. And basically what that is all the food that you normally eat on a day-to-day basis. So this is just your average regular food that you eat, and try to work to where you have a 6-month to 1 year supply of those foods. And I understand that some of those foods don't have that long of a shelf life, but for the foods that do have that long of a shelf life, try to have a working pantry of 6 months to 1 year supply of those foods. And of course you're going to rotate them. So for things like ketchup and mayonnaise and your canned foods, and some of your dry pastas and things like that, seasonings and stuff that you typically will last at least 6 months to a year on the shelf, have those built up ahead of time and work up to that. So each time you go out and you go grocery shopping, buy a little bit extra and add to that to where you can eventually build up a 6-month to 1 year supply. And that's your working prepper pantry. Then as you're doing that, also work on a 1 to 2 year supply of long-term food storage. This may not cover all of your food needs, but you can certainly build up a lot of basic calories by doing this. And this is where you're going to find your big 5-gallon buckets of rice and beans, cans of freeze-dried food, multiple cans of vegetables that have a 5 to 10 year shelf life. And so this is more of your long-term stuff that you're going to store up and try to build up to a 1 to 2 year supply of that. Those are some real good basic steps to begin with food storage to try to build up, your food supply. Along the way with foods, if you're able to grow your own foods, certainly learn how to preserve and store those too, because that's a real cheap way to build up long-term food storage, is foods that you raise yourself, produce and preserve yourself. Next up is medical. So if you have no medical skills to start off with, a basic medical kit, first aid kit is probably okay to start off with, but certainly don't stop there. You really need to develop a trauma kit, something that would be similar to what you would see a paramedic carry. This is definitely going to increase your odds of survival and taking care of the things that might happen that could be more traumatic. You need to start putting one together. Now you can buy one already put together, and those aren't bad, but you can usually save money by putting one together yourself. So for in the beginning, if you don't really know anything, you might just want to purchase one. but over time start putting things together. That way you can have a little back room supply of these things like bandages and gauze and certain things that you might need. So don't just rely on just what comes in the kit. Have some backups to resupply as you use them. Make one that's portable, and you should have that in your home, meaning that you don't have all your medical supplies just on a shelf in a pantry. Because if something happens where someone's injured out in your yard or on your farm or whatever, you want to be able to take the medical kit to them. So have it in a bag. This is not necessarily a bug out bag. This is just your medical trauma kit in a bag so that it's portable. So that if your spouse gets injured outside or your child or something, you're not having to take bags and boxes of things. You have one solid, all-together trauma kit that you can carry to them. And this is something that's really important that a lot of people kind of don't think about. Also have one in your vehicle. You should have some type of medical kit in your vehicle if something happens. And it doesn't always have to be a car accident. It could just be a typical injury. And you need to have some kind of medical kit in your vehicle to take care of those basic injuries. Along with the medical kit, I kind of lumped this together, even though it is a little separate. You should start building up personal hygiene items. Things like toilet paper, soap, baby wipes. Those are real good things that you can build up along the way. Buy a little extra each time you go shopping and keep those set aside because you know what, you're going to really want toilet paper. I know that there's other ways to clean yourself other than toilet paper, but it doesn't hurt to build up toilet paper. Although it's bulky, it is pretty cheap to purchase. Then once you get those things out of the way, start also looking at your basic survival equipment. This is going to be things that not just you would put in, say, a bug out bag, but things that you're going to keep around your home to kind of help you along the way. It could be things like a fire starting kit, rope, cutting tools, meaning like knives and stuff that you would need to just have around the house. Have a little bag or a box of these things. And then along the way, you need to also develop proper clothing. A lot of the quote-unquote outdoor clothing that you might find in more of the trendy stores are not really going to last that long if you're really becoming a more active outdoor person, because maybe you're in a survival situation or a down situation where you're having to spend more time outside. So develop the proper clothing, proper footwear, clothing for when it's cold, clothing for when it's raining, those types of things, because a lot of people nowadays, they spend so little time outside, they don't even own proper outdoor clothing. So you need to have that. And then also extra things like blankets, socks, underwear are very critical to have on hand, just stored away. Also have some temporary shelter or things that could be used for temporary shelter, and tarps work really good for this. Also having emergency blankets. These are items that would be helpful to have stored up. And then maybe have like a 72-hour kit. A lot of people might call it a bug out bag. Even if you're not necessarily planning to bug out, having things like that in a bag set up that you can easily get to are very helpful. Even if you're not leaving your home, just having it there to grab is very helpful. And then some other things to think about is building up your own library of good books on how to do these things. And there's a few things here. Number one, you cannot depend just upon the internet to go to find information on how to take care of a broken leg, because guess what? The internet may not be working. The electricity may not be working. And then you don't want to also just depend upon that book, that it's going to be on the shelf so that you can use it when the time needs, because you can't be looking in a book on how to mend a broken leg or set a broken leg while the person is laying there in pain. So what I mean by that is you need to get those books and you need to start reading through them. You need to become familiar with these books and then practice the skills that you're learning in these books. So have a library and then use that library on a regular basis of reading the books and trying to practice some of those skills. Dedicate an area in your home to store these items. Have a room or a closet or an area that you can dedicate that this is where I'm going to store my preparedness equipment, my preparedness supplies. And that way you know where it's at all times, and then regularly check these items. Some items expire, sometimes they can become damaged. So check these items on a regular basis so that you're kind of keeping on top of what condition they're in and your inventory. Also, practice with these items. Become familiar with the things that you have so that you know how to use the items that you have, and you know how to cook with the food that you have. Maybe you don't cook on a regular basis with some of the food you have in storage, so you need to occasionally cook with it so that you know how to cook with it. And then, have how to cook with it. If the power is out, are you even able to cook the food that you have? So you need to have that all within your plan. Evaluate your plan on an equipment regularly. This is something that's constantly growing. And as you grow and as you learn, you might realize what you were thinking about doing 6 months ago just isn't really going to work any longer. So be able to keep that plan fluid and able to change with ebbs and flows as you learn. So don't become stagnant and don't become tunnel focused on just one thing. Keep it moving and keep it fluid. Evaluate your location, evaluate your personal situation, and how an emergency will affect you and what you can do to create a better outcome. So think about these things. Try to come up with scenarios in your head. What will happen if this happens? What can I do ahead of time to make it a little bit easier to get through that? Know that prepping is simply an insurance policy to increase your odds of survival. That's really all it is. It's no different than buying insurance on your car or your house or your medical insurance. It's just an insurance policy to increase your odds of survival. And everything that you do today increases those odds. So even no matter how small it is and how little it may seem at the time, if you are moving forward and becoming more knowledgeable and becoming more prepared, you are increasing your odds of survival. And in the very end, prepping is simply this: increasing your readiness for the things in life that are not normal. That's all it is. That's all prepping is. It's not some, crazy tactical, becoming some super operator. It's just doing things in your life to increase your odds of survival. So little by little, you too can become more prepared. Don't think that it's too late, and don't think that it's too much for you to do. Little by little, you can become more prepared in your life for just the regular things that happen that aren't normal. And if you do that, you're also increasing your preparedness level for the really big things that could happen, the big apocalyptic, life-changing, earth-shattering events. You can also be prepared for those if you're just being prepared for all the things that happened in your day. So I hope that this list helps you, and I want to encourage you that if you're just starting out, you too can become more prepared, and don't give up, and just every day try to become a little bit more prepared than you were the day before. All right, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.